Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today I would like to speak about Manchester by the Sea, a drama film directed by Kenneth Lonergan. Manchester by the Sea is the story of Lee Chandler, portrayed by Casey Affleck, who lives a quiet and reserved life working as a handyman. Unfortunately, Lee's life is disrupted one day with one simple phone call. As a matter of fact, the film opens with the death of Lee's brother Joe. Lee then travels to Manchester by the Sea, a small town where his brother used to live with his son Patrick. Lee is obviously sad because of his brother's sudden death, but handles the whole situation with detachment in a cold manner. He only reveals his feelings when he discovers the implications of his brother's death and the fact that his brother had nominated him as Patrick's guardian, so his son's guardian. Lee handles all the procedures following his brother's death, but is extremely reluctant in accepting his role as Patrick's guardian. This is for a series of different reasons. For example, the differences between the two, the little emotional attachment he has towards him, all the series of decisions about where to live. Also, Lee feels as if he can't take on the responsibility of looking after Patrick and being his guardian after some serious issues in his past, which led him and his now ex-wife Randy, portrayed by Michelle Williams, to drift apart. Manchester by the Sea is one of the most praised films of this year and is now nominated for 6 Academy Awards, so 6 Oscars. It will be competing for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Casey Affleck, Best Supporting Actor for Lucas Hedges, which portrays Patrick, Best Supporting Actress for Michelle Williams, and Best Original Screenplay. How did it achieve all of this? So what makes it so special? Manchester by the Sea achieved this level of appraisal through simplicity and shown a real, although tragic, situation in which all this series of human emotions come to surface. Most of Manchester by the Sea depicts Lee Chandler organising his brother's departure, so visiting lawyers, funeral homes, and also avoiding having any connection with his nephew Patrick. And that's it. It's not an over-dramatic film about a character desperate for a recent death, which fiercely tries to remain focused, tries to not have a breakdown, while also trying to create a connection with a rebellious teenager, the only living memory he has of his deceased relative. Manchester by the Sea avoided all of this, and it tried to keep it as real as possible. It's a real story, and what is more meaningful and deep than real human emotions, real experiences? In this film, emotions, expressions, and all the minuscule details of our mundane life are shown exactly as they would happen in real life, spreading a sensation of sadness and understanding that probably a lot of elaborate stories would never have conveyed. Manchester by the Sea is very simple. It speaks about death. Grief is one of the main topics. But in the real world, not everybody reacts to trauma in the same way. For example, Lee is extremely detached. He seems to analyse the situation in a cold way. And this isn't because he doesn't care about his brother, but because he has lived certain experiences which have led him to tackle trauma in an analytic way. Lee's brother was the only person that kept the whole family together. He was always there for Lee, both mentally and physically, and his loss only worsens Lee's psychological issues. Most of his life is shown through flashbacks which give us deep insights into his past and into why he is reluctant to take Patrick under his wing. His relationship with his ex-wife Randy is not portrayed in a tragic-comic fashion with big crocodile tears and loving embraces. Their relationship has received blows so big that we can't even begin to imagine what is running through their brains. Their dialogues are stuttering, they interrupt one another, they cry but also try to keep their tears back. They feel hatred and love, they feel the weight of the past and can't manage to shrug it off. Patrick does represent the rebellious teenager. He seems to care mostly about hanging out with his friends and his girlfriends, but is he really that detached? Is he really as detached as Lee? Probably not, because we see him having a breakdown in one of the most realistic depictions of a panic attack I've ever seen on screen. He stutters, cries, shouts, finds it hard to breathe. Sometimes we tend to repress a bad emotion. We try to cover a negative fact with 100 smaller positive facts, hoping that our mind will slowly forget about the trauma. But when our mind finds us alone, when we don't have a positive backup, everything comes crashing down. And this is perfectly portrayed on screen screen when Patrick starts to cry about his father's death, but also still tries to avoid Lee, because in that moment they are 100 contrast contrasting different emotions running through our mind. It's nearly as if he has to maintain his status of a strong male figure, but also he is silently trying to cry out for help and doesn't want to accept his father's death, but at the same time just wants to move on. There are so many emotions flowing through our mind in that moment, and Lucas Hedges perfectly portrayed that situation. So it's no wonder that all three actors I've just spoken about are nominated for Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor or Actress at the upcoming Oscar Awards. Now, just as the character's behaviour is analysed in all its deepness, the film also spends a huge amount of time on seemingly useless details. For example, there is one scene in which Lee and Patrick are walking towards the car, and in that moment they're having a discussion still while they're getting into the car, and Patrick complains because the passenger door won't open, and he tugs on it and complains, all of this in the midst of a discussion which had nothing to do with the door. I don't know if this was improvised, but whether it was or it wasn't, it just shows how realistic the film is, because how many times have we had a discussion with a person and then started to get annoyed and point out useless details just to add fuel to the discussion. Another example, still with Patrick, is when he is invited to a relative's house for a meal, but he hasn't basically met this relative in his whole life. So there's all that cringy situation, that social anxiety of trying to be polite, but also subconsciously not wanting to be in that situation. But these aren't annoying small details which make the film tedious and boring, but on the contrary, how many times have you been in an upsetting situation but still had to keep on with your mundane daily activities, which suddenly lose all of their importance but at the same time suddenly become fundamental? Lee is terribly suffering for the loss of his brother, but still has to shop for groceries, remember where he parked the car, scold Patrick for not wearing warmer clothes. When a tragic event happens, or in general an upsetting situation happens, our life doesn't suddenly transform into a film plot in which we suddenly have an epiphany about the meaning of life. On the contrary, we keep on with our daily activities, as they are probably the only thing that in that moment keeps us with our feet on the ground. And also, these situations trigger a series of strange, unexpected and contrasting emotions. For example, Lee and Patrick discuss over the flavour of pizza while their whole world is falling to pieces around them. I absolutely loved Manchester by the Sea, and I would be extremely pleased if both Casey Affleck and Lucas Hedges received their Best Actor awards at the upcoming Oscar ceremony, because they beautifully portrayed what we could describe as a fictional reality. And what's harder than faking and portraying a life and making it appear real? Let me know with a comment here below what you thought about Manchester by the Sea and about Casey Affleck's nomination for Best Actor. And also remember to subscribe for many more movie related videos. See you soon in a new video. Bye!